Welcome back to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Menti. It's been 1 year since 5-year-old Dulce Maria Alavez was abducted from a park in Bridgeton, Cumberland County. And investigators in Bridgeton have never stopped looking for her or her abductor. Here is my interview with Cumberland County Prosecutor Jennifer Webb McCrae. Hi, and thanks for doing this. I know that September 16th, 2019 is an important date in Cumberland County and across New Jersey because it's the day that Dulce was abducted. It's been a year later now. What's the latest in the case?
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show to share the fact that we have not forgotten about Dulce Maria Alavez. This is an ongoing, active investigation. I've shared with other news outlets that we have, as recently as the last 30 days, received tips and been out of state following up on those tips. So I want the public to know that this investigation will never close. It will remain open until we determine the circumstances that led to Dulce's disappearance. And we really need the public to remain vigilant. In the absence of evidence telling us that Dulce is no longer with us, we remain hopeful that Dulce is alive. There are cases around the country where children have been located after a year has passed by. So I still remain hopeful that with the public's help, we're going to be able to crack this case and determine the circumstances that led to Dulce's disappearance.
I want to go back to the tips that the tips that sent investigators out of state. Is that the first time in the investigation that's happened?
No, it's not the first time, but I share that to say that we're still getting tips. People still care about little Dulce, and it's our mission to follow up on every tip. And one recent tip did take us, somewhere out of state.
Is the FBI involved at this point?
Yes, the FBI, the New Jersey State Police Missing Persons Unit, the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office, as well as the Bridgeton Police Department. I also would like to thank all of the agencies throughout the state, as well as the nation, who have, when there were possible sightings, possible leads, assisted us and the FBI with tracking down those leads. And part of that is part of the reason that I remain hopeful that there's somebody out there that either knows something or will see something that will help us locate Dulce or the circumstances surrounding her disappearance.
There was a description put out almost a year ago of a young male, a Hispanic male between the age of 25 and 35. Is that still in holding? Is that still the case?
That is still the case. We have called that person a person of interest. We still would like to speak to that person if that person can be located.
Go back to that day. It's been a year. What do we know about that day that you think is definitive at this point based on the tips you've received?
Well, I really will not talk about the details of the investigation. And the reason why is I'm a prosecutor. So once we solve this case and find someone that we believe is accountable for Dulce's disappearance, we want to prosecute that case. So this has an element of being a criminal investigation. So there are facts and circumstances that would only be known possibly to the person responsible. So we generally do not talk about that in the public domain. There are facts that we know. We know the time that she disappeared. There are certain facts that we know. But until, as a prosecutor, we're willing to authorize charges to hold someone responsible or find Dulce, I'm not going to talk about the details and facts.
From your answer, you lead me to believe, or one would be led to believe, that there are some things that you've withheld from the public on that day because if you find someone, you can use those details to find out if the stories match up. Is that fair?
That is fair, and I would frame it differently. There obviously would be information that a person who is responsible for Dulce's disappearance would have. And if we talk about those facts in the public domain, certainly there would be a defense attorney or someone else who would say, well, that person could have learned those facts from another source.
I get it.
So, my 25 years of criminal practice, it's just best practice to hold those facts close to the vest.
What do you want out at this point? Obviously, you must appreciate the media attention on the case a year later. What do you want out in the public right now?
What I want the public to remember is that Dulce is someone's daughter, someone's granddaughter. She's a child in this community, and as obviously this disappearance has caused trauma to her family. It's caused trauma to our community. We're not going to forget about Dulce. That this case is going to remain an active, ongoing investigation until we solve it. And I ask and implore them to remain vigilant. So and be on the lookout. Additionally, I ask them any piece of information that seems, even a piece that seems insignificant to them, could be that one puzzle piece that helps us crack this case. So we're encouraging them to not discount anything and report that information to law enforcement. We've spent a great deal of time just ensuring the public that if a person who is undocumented, who may be afraid to come forward, has information, we do not care about their immigration status. There's something in New Jersey called the Immigration Trust Directive. If you are a witness or a victim of a crime, police officers know they cannot ask you about your immigration status. And our governor has said that, as well as our attorney general, directly in relation to this case. However, if a person who is afraid because of that reason comes forward, we've given them a way to give us information anonymously. They can do that through our tip 411 line, and that's by texting to 847-411 with either Bridgeton or CCPO tip in the tagline, the information that they want to provide. And investigators are able to communicate anonymously, but ask questions on that message line.
This has got to be very personal and very frustrating to you and other investigators. Talk about the case and what it means personally to you and to them.
Well, I've already mentioned that obviously something like this is traumatic to a community, and it makes every parent in a community just hold their child just a little bit tighter when something like this happens. I am a mother and a grandmother. And in addition to that, many of the investigators that are actively working this case have small children. So it's a matter of checking in, making sure everybody's okay so that they can remain focused and remain vigilant in this case. We're doing the same thing with the family, Dulce's family, through our Office of Victim Witness Advocacy, just touching in, making sure that we stay in contact so they see evidence that we have not forgotten about Dulce, and we are committed to solving this case.
So the public should know from this interview that you are just as committed to this case as you were on September 16th, 2019.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. That was Cumberland County Prosecutor Jennifer Webb McCrae. When we come back, we'll continue our coverage of the abduction of Dulce Alavez and talk to a FBI investigator who has solved dozens of these cases. That's next.
Description depicts a Hispanic man, and it depicts a person that authorities might be looking for. A month later in the case, authorities also released a sketch. Didn't call that person a suspect. So my question to you is, who are authorities looking for, and then why did that description change a month into the case?
Yeah, well, I think that essentially process information, you can start to either eliminate things or add to the investigation. I think the sketches from people who were in the park at the time who saw a Hispanic male that is a subject of interest because he was around the area of the playground. Early on, the Amber Alert went out for the red van. We have identified a red vehicle that was in the park at the time that was not involved, or there's no indication So because there's so much cross traffic in that park, there might be people who are in there for completely legitimate purposes, and someone saw their vehicle or saw them and reported as possibly being involved in the abduction. So we kind of like look into every possible avenue. I think that they are definitely still looking for that Hispanic male who was in the area of the playground, because we haven't identified him, and we don't know what he was doing there. We've identified a lot of other people that were in the park, that said they were in the park, that explained why they were in the park, a lot of people that were dropping kids off at sporting events and things like that. So as we identify people that were positively in the park for a totally legitimate reason, we can rule them out. But obviously, there were a lot of people that use that park, especially in September when the weather's still nice, and kids had just gotten out of school maybe an hour earlier. So that's really important. But that's also why it's so important that the public understand that we believe there are witnesses out there who saw the abductor, who saw the vehicle in the area near the park, and either haven't come forward because they're afraid to come forward, or haven't come forward because they don't realize how important the information is that they have. We know in a lot of cases like this, the person that did this likely would have either lived in Bridgeton, been familiar with Bridgeton, or had a reason to be where they were in that park. And that's why we're convinced that there are still witnesses out there that have really valuable information that might lead to the recovery of Dulce that have not come forward yet.
So you touched on a couple of things that I just kind of want to go back over. What would you say the description of the suspect is currently, that I could get out to the public?
Yeah, we definitely have a younger Hispanic male, and by younger I mean maybe 25 to 35 years of age, that was described as being in the park around the area of the playground, that we have not identified. So two things: if you are that person, if you come forward and acknowledge the fact that you were that person, that would allow us to either rule you out as someone who is there for a legitimate reason. But to date, we haven't had anyone come forward that we've identified as that person in the park. The composite was done by someone who saw that person in that area, based on their recollection of what they look like.
And you just said they saw them in there. Was this person with Dulce? Was this person just in the park and they haven't been identified? So you're just kind of ruling out people that were there, or is there any connection to this individual in the sketch and Dulce in the park?
Yeah, this person was described as being in close proximity to Dulce, in the area of the park. And the way that playground area is set up, it's pretty kind of remote from, it's near the basketball courts. There are some outbuildings, which is likely where the person would have parked adjacent to the playground. And that's the general area the person was. So that's why we're still really focused on trying to identify who that person was and ascertain why they were there.
And I talked to Police Chief Michael Gamari, and he had said that there's video not directly watching over where Dulce was, but there's video essentially you couldn't really get around that area without being on video. It's fair to say that the person you're looking for is in, some of this footage that you guys obtained, correct?
Yeah, so the video, that there are numerous vehicles that we have not identified because they're all different quality of videos. There's some of the video is very, very good, and where you can identify make and model of vehicle, in some cases even a license plate. And some of the video is very grainy, poor quality, where it's even difficult to tell whether it's a SUV or a passenger car. So we do have lots of video of cars coming and going to the park. And we do have several vehicles that we have yet to identify. So again, if you were in the park during that time period, or around the park during that time period, and you have not been contacted by the FBI or law enforcement, we would ask you to call and acknowledge that, because that would then allow us to move on to other things.
And this red van, local authorities have told me multiple times that they're not wed to the red van. Where do you stand on this vehicle? It's been essentially the center of the case start, Hispanic male and this red van. Where does it stand in your mind, the vehicle?
Yeah, I think that, I work child abductions for the FBI, and I cover both on a national team, and I cover the whole East Coast. And I think it's not uncommon when you have cases like this to get these, we call them shiny objects that you identify as possibly involved, that you start going after to find out that it's probably not the vehicle involved. Like I said, we did absolutely identify a red vehicle that was completely consistent with the description of the red car that was described to us. It was absolutely in the park at the time. It was there for a totally legitimate reason, and we've ruled that particular red vehicle out, and we just don't see anything else that's consistent with that.
So authorities, excuse me, not authorities, the public really should just be looking out for the description like you just gave, and also, any detail, any kind of recollection you have of that day to come forward, because it's really hard to determine, no detail is too small.
Yeah, I think more importantly, what there's a few things the public should be aware of. One is, I know there's been a lot of concern in the community in Bridgeton and elsewhere where people might be afraid to come forward because of their immigration status. We are not interested in anyone's immigration status at all. What we're interested in is finding Dulce Alavez. And we know that we can't do that by ourselves, and that the community, time and time again, has been what has solved these cases, and we need them to come forward. But more importantly, the person that took Dulce Alavez, their behavior both before and after the abductions are critical. We don't believe that the person that took Dulce Alavez, that this was the first time that they went to a park to maybe observe children. So we would ask people in the community that might have seen someone in and around that park days preceding the event, that made them feel uncomfortable, or they were in the area of the playground by themselves and they didn't have children with them, and made them concerned. Also, after the event too, we would be concerned about someone who maybe didn't show up to work for a few days after the event, or changed their appearance, or maybe changed the appearance of the vehicle because they were concerned. And these behavioral cues are really important for us, because we see that when we look at these cases in hindsight, a lot of these suspects have pretty consistent behavior.
Do you feel like this suspect, or the person you're looking for, may have abducted other children, or may have been involved in other child crimes?
We don't know for sure. What I can tell you is that when you look at cases, we go back and look at case studies back to the 60s when we look at child abduction cases, and it isn't consistent that someone who took one child had previously either attempted to take another child or won't take a child in the future. And we see that, and there's a lot of pretty famous cases across the country where an abductor takes one child and then either had previously done the same crime, or years later will do it again.
And you just talked about cases across the country. In your long career with the FBI, where does this stand as far as notable cases? I mean, we're coming up on a year, and you handle these types of crimes through your career. Where does this stand in your career?
Yeah, I mean, this is cases like this, these long-term abduction cases are very emotionally draining and very frustrating. Most of these cases are resolved fairly quickly within generally weeks. They don't go out this long. So this certainly is an outlier. We've had other cases similar to this in South Jersey. We had the Mark Heimbaugh case many years ago, where Mark still has not been recovered, and we're actually still get leads on that case 20 plus years later. So it's very rare. We generally do find these kids much faster, but the cases do happen, and we really are confident that Dulce Alavez will be found, that will identify the person that took her, but it involves a lot of work and a lot of people continuing to call in tips. We still get tips regularly that we follow up on. We get a lot of lookalike tips that we follow up on, and we get a lot of behavioral tips too, where someone will say something just doesn't seem right about this person, and I think that they were in Bridgeton at the time. You might want to check them out.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you said a couple of weeks ago about this being a crime of opportunity. Both uh, both local authorities have said multiple times to me that it could be a crime of opportunity, but they're really keeping their you know keeping everything more or less open. Is Are you still, in your opinion, is this still a crime of opportunity that she was abducted by someone that wasn't really trying to abduct her? Do I understand that to be correct?
Yeah, no, I think by crime of opportunity, what we mean by that, or what the FBI means by that, is it wasn't a targeted abduction in the sense that Dulce Alavez was specifically the target in the planned the person that was going to be abducted. So, I mean, you like to keep all possibilities open because then that allows you to do the most thorough investigation. When you start focusing in just one area, it kind of narrows the scope a little bit. So I think generally how the child abduction rapid deployment team, when we go out for cases, is we treat every single one as a crime of opportunity because then we're going to look at everything more thoroughly. So I think though, when you look at how this abduction occurred, where it occurred, it would be logical that if someone was looking for a child, they would be somewhere children are, and that they would wait for an opportune time where maybe the caretaker wasn't paying attention or was distracted for them to do what they did, which would be to take Dulce. So certainly we are looking at it as a crime of opportunity, but we're investigating all possibilities. And right now, the strongest avenue would be to say it's a crime of opportunity where the offender happened to be in that area and Dulce happened to cross their path at an inopportune time.
So just to follow up to that, I mean, if it's a crime of opportunity, it kind of takes away certain aspects of who you're looking for. So this person may not have been a close friend or someone that knew her entirely. Is it fair to say that assessment?
Yeah, that's completely possible. I mean, obviously, when we look at these cases, we clearly will do a full investigation on everyone that is associated with Dulce. Her family has been cooperative and continues to be cooperative. We've investigated every aspect of, like would do in any case like this, and look at all the possibilities very thoroughly. And so we continue to investigate this as a crime where Dulce was selected for because she was in the park. And that allows us to look at every possibility and every avenue of investigation.
So as we approach this year anniversary of her disappearance, and you've said that you've received many tips throughout. Where are you now in the case, and where does this case stand currently?
Well, the case is still very active. We get several leads a week that we follow up, whether it's a lookalike lead, we'll still get some red van leads. It's not uncommon for us to get also tips that come in that are bogus. That's not uncommon, where people, for whatever reason, want to accuse someone or make something up, which we spend a lot of time following up leads like that, which really distract from the what we're trying to do, which is conduct a thorough investigation that are legitimate. But we're still going to follow up on any lead that comes in. So we're moving forward, and then we're going back and looking at a lot of the old information and trying to see are there things that may have been missed. Is there anything with technology that may help us? Are there any things out there that may develop new leads or new information?
Do you feel Dulce is still alive?
Those are really tough questions. I believe she's still alive. I believe that when we don't find someone that's been abducted, that you have to go on believing that they're alive and they're going to be found. And I think historically, when we look at some of these old cases, whether it's Stephen Stainer or some of the other cases, J.C. Dugard, where kids were taken at a very young age and held for a very long time and either self-rescued or were found and recovered, those are the cases that give us the hope to keep looking and keep believing that we're going to find them alive and they're going to be okay. So yeah, I believe that she's still alive.
And your last message to, the public that's watching this, what do you say to them? You discussed this during this interview, but what would you say, hey, like, what's your last message to the public?
I think it's really important that the public understands that our primary interest is bringing Dulce Alavez home and identifying the person that took her. We don't believe that we can do that by ourselves. We believe we need the community's help for that. And we also want the community to understand that we are in no way interested in someone's immigration status. What we're interested in is information that will lead to the recovery of Dulce and lead to the identification of the person that took her. We're working closely with our state and local partners, and we believe that through
story on Action News tonight is a grim anniversary in Bridgeton, New Jersey. It was a year ago today that 5-year-old Dulce Maria Alavez disappeared from a neighborhood park. Tonight, those close to the family and members of the community returned to the park for a vigil, even as police continue to pursue clues as to Dulce's fate. Live on the scene tonight is Action News reporter George Solis. And George, what's the latest there?
Jim, at this hour, members of the community and the family have gathered here at the park where Dulce was last seen 1 year ago today. Many heavy hearts thinking back to what happened 1 year ago. I spoke to Dulce's mother tonight, who says she has many regrets. It's now been 1 year since 5-year-old Dulce Maria Alavez vanished from this Bridgeton, New Jersey park. Tonight, members of the community, including her mother, reuniting where the chaos all began for a gathering to remind the world she is not forgotten.
Pray for that we'll return Dulce home.
We caught up with Noema Alavez Perez early this morning ahead of the gathering.
It gives me bad memories because I wish I could go back to the time and come with her to the park and not leave her alone.
Noema says she's aware that questions about her daughter's disappearance have centered in large part around her.
We didn't have nothing to do with it because we were cooperating with the police and everything.
In interviews, she's claimed the day Dulce vanished, she let her and her 3-year-old son run off to play on the swings at the playground while she stayed in her car. A little while later, she says she found her son crying and Dulce nowhere in sight. According to investigators, police were called about 45 minutes after the suspected abduction. This video from a nearby gas station is the last known footage of Dulce on that fateful day. Massive searches eventually leading to this sketch of a man believed could know something about the case.
That photo is still a good photo.
Cumberland County Prosecutor Jennifer Webb McCrae.
Until we charge and prosecute who is responsible for the disappearance of Dulce Maria Alavez, all possible motives and theories are on the table.
That includes the possibility this was a crime of opportunity. Authorities say the pandemic, like most things, slowed down the investigation, but things are picking up.
There are solid leads, and then we still investigate.
Dulce's mother, who has since given birth to a little girl in the year since Dulce disappeared, says she continues to hold out hope her daughter will come home and will no longer hide until she's found.
I'm not scared of cameras, so I want them to know that I'm still looking for Dulce.
Jim, authorities do believe that some are holding out information, stressing that they do not care about immigration status. And a year later, there are still no cameras at the park, but officials tell us they have increased patrols. We do have more information about this case, including more interviews with investigators at our website, 6abc.com. For now, we are live in Bridgeton, New Jersey tonight. George Solis, Channel 6, Action News. Jim.
I was using Google Analytics and hated it. With Aribi, I can create any funnel, even a...
This is Eyewitness News at 5, and we are streaming live on CBSN Philly. Good evening, everyone. I'm Yuki Washington.
And I'm Jessica Cartalia. First, at 5 o'clock, it's been 1 year since Dulce Maria Alavez went missing from a park in Bridgeton. Family and friends have not given up the search and are gathering right now for a vigil. That's where Eyewitness News reporter Matt Petrillo joins us. And Matt, you spoke with Dulce's mother.
Jess, that's right. She tells me that this time a year ago, she was with her little girl here at Bridgeton City Park. Dulce was just running behind me. Dulce's mother looked away for a moment. She tells me that was the last time she saw Dulce. And tonight, so many people are coming together to remember her life and pray for her safe return.
She was sweet, she was loving, caring.
Photos of the sweet smile of Dulce Alavez are posted on flyers and signs all over Bridgeton City Park. Signs of the 5-year-old are also in storefronts, urging anyone with information over her disappearance from 1 year ago to come forward.
The situation is not easy for my family.
But there are few signs that point to exactly where Dulce went or who might be involved. The lingering questions over what happened that tragic day still haunts Dulce's mother.
It's hard for us to know that Dulce is not here with us and that they can still find her.
Tonight, the Bridgeton community is searching for answers too.
No tip is too small.
Jennifer Webb-McCrae of the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office says investigators are still actively searching for Dulce.
If someone were to believe they had a sighting, to report that information.
So many people are still holding on to hope. Do you think that Dulce is really still alive?
In the absence of evidence that tells us that Dulce is no longer with us, we are very hopeful that she remains alive.
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy spoke about the case during today's news conference.
Anyone who has any information is urged to call the New Jersey State Police.
And the FBI told us last week they are still reviewing security video taken from the park, but they admit they still have very little evidence. Reporting live in Bridgeton, Matt Petrillo, CBS 3 Eyewitness News.
1 year. Okay, Matt, thank you.
You told us what you want, and we built it for you. Editor X, the advanced
or someone who has a relationship with the victim. So that's where law enforcement's going to start.
So JJ, let's pick up on some of the players in the case. So we're working on the Dulce Maria Alavez case, 5 years old, missing out of Bridgeton since mid-September of 2019. This is a photo that the mom originally provided of Dulce in her kindergarten uniform. She was going to school at a Buckshootum school. She'd only been there a week or so and had come home from school that day. When she came home from school, the mother said she took a little while to get dressed. They were going to go out. It was a beautiful afternoon. She put on this yellow shirt that had, I think, a hippopotamus on it and some flowered pants, sandals. This is a picture of her at that Sunoco gas station about an hour or so before she went missing. How critical a piece of this information of the last visual video of the little girl is to this investigation?
Well, it's important in that if the mother's not sure exactly what she was wearing, here we have documented evidence of what she's wearing, and that becomes important when they put the Amber Alert out. At least for the day or a few days immediately following an abduction, they want to be able to say that she was wearing a yellow shirt with a hippopotamus on it and checkered pants or flowered pants.
Sure.
And if the mother, can't remember, Dulce might have picked out her own clothes, so the mother may not have really been paying attention to what she was wearing. So this is important, and that we know what she was wearing when she disappeared.
I want to walk you through Bridgeton City Park a little bit. So from that Sunoco station, which is kind of over here in Bridgeton, they would have likely driven into the park this way on Babe Ruth Drive. This is another through street. Bridgeton High School is right over here. This is the basketball court and the park, and this is where the mother parked right here in this little parking spot. It's next to a concession stand that's no longer in use. So this building was not operational at the time. They park here. Mom and younger sister stay in the car. They're scratching off lottery tickets, and Dulce and her younger brother Manny go running through these trees here, which they're a little more dense at this point than they are now. This basketball court, there's a hill around it. There's a fence around it. It blocks the view of this playground. How challenging is this terrain after the fact for authorities, including the FBI, the card team who arrived the next day?
Well, I don't know that necessarily you could say it's challenging, but obviously the problem is, now you're losing a key eyewitness in the mother, and that she can't see the playground where Dulce is headed to before she disappears. And obviously there are no cameras in any of these buildings, even the operational buildings. So there's really nobody who's a potential witness to this unless there just happens to be somebody else in the park at the time.
Yeah, there were
walking
people
a dog
playing.
or playing basketball.
Yeah, and they've interviewed all those people, and they've interviewed some of those people multiple times. Are they important witnesses?
Well, they are, because obviously they were a lot closer to the last place we know Dulce was, which is that playground before she disappeared. You know, if they're playing basketball, they may not be paying attention to two little kids going to a playground in a park. There's nothing unusual about that. So,
sure.
You know, it's hard to know what the value of their information will be, but clearly if they had a view of the playground, one of them could have seen somebody who might have led Dulce off behind that public works building, you know, with a younger brother talked about.
Yeah, we're told the younger brother dropped his ice cream somewhere in this vicinity and had seen a person in either that red van, red truck, Hispanic gentleman, light skin, medium build, acne on his face, somewhere behind these buildings. That's quite a distance from where she was parked at that point, and no surveillance cameras on here, and no surveillance cameras put in since. Had they put in surveillance cameras since then? Would that help with anything?
No, I mean, not with this investigation. Obviously, you need surveillance contemporaneous with her disappearance. You know, now they wouldn't serve any purpose in this investigation.
Okay. I'm going to move over to the mom, and we talked about this a few minutes ago, but she was interviewed until after midnight, the same night that Dulce disappeared. She was at the park the next day. Talk to me about what you see in this picture here and the demeanor and how important her demeanor might have been to authorities that day.
Well, immediately after the abduction, it's hard, I think, to put too much importance on the demeanor of a parent. Now, clearly, if there are no eyewitnesses to the abduction, the police are going to go on the assumption that it is an abduction, but they're always going to start closest to the victim.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think of you know, the relationships to a victim as concentric circles, you know, the mother, the father, who is not, you know, wasn't in the area, lives in Mexico, and he's kind of out of the picture. But you're always going to start closest and move out, because the simple fact is stranger child abductions are relatively rare. It's almost always a relative, you know, or someone who has a relationship with the victim. So that's where law enforcement's going to start. So,
well, we're still on mom.
Right. So her demeanor immediately after the reported disappearance, it's important in the big picture. I don't think we can say just based on her demeanor at the time of that interview. You know, I don't think we can necessarily put too much importance on her demeanor right then, but it is certainly something that behavioral analysts are going to look at. Her demeanor then, her demeanor during the 911 call, her demeanor during these media interviews.
Or a polygraph, per
right.
se.
Her demeanor during a polygraph or during the law enforcement interviews, which obviously we as the public don't have access to, but the FBI's behavioral analysis unit does.
Yeah, we don't know the outcome of a polygraph. We do know that she had 1 or 2 cell phones, and one was given back to her. So while we're on mom here, would they give her cell phone back if it contained critical evidence?
No. I mean, if the phone had something on it that was evidence of a potential crime, the police would keep it.
For that very reason.
Right, because now it's evidence of a potential crime. They don't know, you know, the prosecutor may not know exactly how that evidence is going to be used ultimately at this point, but it's evidence.
Sure.
So they're going on the assumption that a crime has been committed here, which, you know, a child abduction or a child disappearance, I mean, is. So the prosecutor is looking at how are we going to prosecute this, if it ever gets to that. I mean, the police obviously are looking for as much forensic evidence as they can collect to use in the investigation, and the prosecutor is thinking about how are they going to prosecute the case. So, yeah, if there's evidence on a phone, they're keeping that phone, even after they get the evidence off of it.
Okay, this is Chief Michael Gaimari of Bridgeton City Police. He arrived with his officers that day, and right away they were on the ground thinking this is hide and seek. This is a child who wandered off into the woods.
99 times out of 100, that's what it is.
Okay, nothing was done wrong at that point. I'm not trying to point blame, but he really only had what the mother gave him to go on, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And you know, the mother didn't see the abduction, per se. All she knows is what her 3-year-old son said. How reliable is a 3-year-old? You know, a 3-year-old is not going to be a witness in a criminal trial. So I think, you know, the police are going they have to be careful in how they approach this, but they're going to say, okay, we have a missing child, whether it's an abduction or a child wandered off. We have a missing child. Priority one, let's find the child.
Find the child, certainly.
No matter how the child disappeared, priority one is finding the child, and they're going to do whatever they can in the minutes and hours after that to do that.
How vital is an Amber Alert, obviously, because it goes out, across the country, but this was 30 hours beyond when she went missing.
That is a lot of time, and obviously an Amber Alert, if you have a usable description of a suspect, of a vehicle,
or license plate, which we do not in this case.
Right, but at least they had originally, they were putting out information about a red van. You want to get that information out to as many people in the public as possible, to as wide a distribution as quickly as possible. While that potential suspect, that potential vehicle, is closer to the crime scene. The more time that elapses, the further away they can get, and the harder it's going to be to get any usable information.
For the police chief, we see his demeanor here a little bit, and the prosecutor, Jennifer Webb McCrae. Give us an idea of what the conversation is prior to addressing the media and the press, together with the grandmother, and pleading for that help. What's some of the talk behind the scenes?
Well, obviously, if the prosecutor is going to come and make a statement, the prosecutor is not involved in the investigation from the beginning. That's the police department and the police chief.
Sure.
So obviously, the police department is going to brief her on as much as they know at that time. The prosecutor is, going to make a statement, but they have to be careful because they have to prosecute the case if someone is ever arrested, if a crime was committed. So they have to think of the evidence of potentially, tainting a jury. So, typically they're not going to put out a lot of information. The police department, even to this day, could have very singular information that they don't want to make public. That's really not going to help catch a person who may have abducted her. So, those conversations are going to go on between the police department and the prosecutor. Here's everything we have. Here's what we should make public. Here's what we don't think we should make public, and why.
It could feed people information, and then they're coming forward to say what they learned on TV.
Yes.
Okay.
Because if you're looking for tips from the public, you want those tips to be firsthand information, not secondhand information or people who are trying to get themselves on TV.
The grandmother in the case, to our knowledge, she only speaks Spanish. She's been very emotional every time we've seen her. We don't see the family dynamic here appearing anyway outwardly when we're there with them to be very loving. Does that weigh in? We know that grandmother actually had custody of Dulce, so she lived there. She didn't live with the mother. She lived with the grandmother. How significant is that?
Well, it could potentially be very significant, and it's clearly something that the investigator is going to look at, something that the behavioral analysis unit is going to look at, to try and build a picture of what was the family dynamic. Is there anybody in the family that might have motive?
Or want her gone?
That's certainly a consideration in these types of instances, and we can look back at many, many cases where a parent or another close relative is responsible for the death of a child, either on purpose or accidentally. So there could be a lot of things, one, that we're not seeing publicly, and two, that the police are looking at, and certainly family dynamic, family relationships. Who did the victim live with? Who did the victim spend most of their time with?
And why?
And why? Who are the biological parents? Who might be raising the child? These are all factors that the investigators are going to look at to try and build an accurate picture of why this child might have disappeared.
Behind the scenes, are they piecing this together similar to how we are with a puzzle and drawing lines and trying to make those connections as well, be it cell phone calls and who pinged what tower and all of those things,
right,
I imagine?
Yeah, they're certainly going to try and put together a picture of everybody that has a relationship with Dulce as the victim.
Sure.
And all of the communications that could have gone on, all of the relationships, the family dynamics, that's all going to factor into this. But again, there's also the possibility that this is a stranger abduction. Someone completely unrelated to her abducted her for whatever reason. So, they're also going to be looking at that possibility, and that's where things like the Amber Alert and the appeal for tips and continuing to look for any surveillance video that they might have missed. 5 months is a long time. Most systems that are recording video are not keeping it that long.
Sure.
So it's likely at this point that there is no usable surveillance video anywhere, even if they got a tip that the car was seen in a certain area.
That chance is gone.
Probably.
This is who the family has told us is the father, who is now 25 years old and lives in Mexico. And how would investigators try to track him down? And if and once they do, what are they asking?
I mean, I understand that the person who, at least we believe, is the biological father, was interviewed. So the Bridgeton police would work through the FBI with that, and the FBI.
That's their role internationally. The FBI.
Well, the FBI has legal attaché offices in embassies and consulates all over the world. There's a legal attaché office in Mexico City that covers Mexico. So FBI agents who are assigned to the Mexico City legal attaché office would work with local authorities to locate and interview the person who's been identified as her biological father.
Asking things like,
well, they would probably want to know,
when's the last time you saw her?
Right. Did you have any communications? Anything relevant to her living in the U.S. with her family? I mean, he's obviously not, he's not really part of their family. But any information that he might have about family dynamics, about the relationship between the victim and her mother, her grandparents, all of that. Any records he might have communications, phone calls, texts, emails.
They're looking at his phone too.
Right. They would look to see, is there any, does he have any connection or any relevant information? Has anybody communicated or contacted him about her disappearance? That would all be relevant. So they would look at that. I mean, obviously, U.S. law enforcement authorities don't have subpoena authority in Mexico. They don't have the ability to compel him to be interviewed, but
or bring him back.
Or bring him back unless he's charged with a crime, and then he could be arrested by the local authorities and extradited. But no, they can't force him to come back. But the legal attaché's offices work very closely with local law enforcement. I'm sure local law enforcement will help locate him, talk to him. But he would be interviewed by FBI agents in Mexico and local police.
JJ, a month after Dulce was taken, this was a sketch that Bridgeton police put out to us, and they didn't even go as far as to say this person was a person of interest. They said this is a man they want to talk to. What does that mean?
It means that they don't really have sufficient information to say that they think he is the person responsible or even involved. So it is somebody that they think has information that's relevant to this. They're not saying why they think that, and that may be information that they want to keep a little close to the vest because they don't want to tip their hand about how they've come to this description and this forensic sketch. But it certainly does match the description that they initially put out in the Amber Alert of a young Hispanic male with a thin build. Now, and then initially in the Amber Alert they said no facial hair. In this, he appears to have a mustache and a small goatee, but the forensic artist has put some acne on his face. They could be going off both the information provided by Dulce's 3-year-old brother and maybe people who are playing basketball in the park that might have seen somebody, or anybody else who could have been in the park that might have seen somebody in the park. They might not be able to say, yes, we saw this person at the park near the playground, or we saw this person in a red van. It may just be a common description that they got from several witnesses who were in the park at the time.
Seeing everything that you see here, are you convinced that she was in the park?
Well, I don't know that there's any way to know that at this point. I mean, we have her mother saying they went to the park, and her 3-year-old brother who is providing information that's consistent with them being in the park. But and again, we don't know if witnesses who might have been on the basketball courts might have said corroborated that they were in the park. We don't know that because the police are not putting that information out publicly. But I think we go with the assumption that she was in the park and that's where Dulce disappeared from, but it's not the only possibility.
Right.
So we look at it in those terms that yes, it is one of many potential possibilities, and I think the police probably have a pretty good idea whether or not she was really in the park or not.
Sure. Last one or two questions, just because I'm thinking of them now, but what we didn't touch on was the fact that they are relying so heavily on a Hispanic community to not be fearful that their immigration would be in jeopardy and to come forward. And potentially, is this could it take one person, just like we talked about chewing gum or a cigarette, but does one person potentially hold the key in that community, and what challenge is that it is a largely Hispanic community?
Well, that's certainly a challenge. There could be somebody out there who has a piece of information that could be very, very important, and they are afraid to come forward because of their immigration status and their fear of deportation. That is a challenge for law enforcement all over this country, in communities of immigrants who are here both legally and illegally.
Sure.
And it has sparked a lot of debate about the role of law enforcement in immigration and enforcing immigration laws. In a lot of instances, police departments have come out publicly and said, you know, we are not here to enforce immigration laws. We are here to investigate and enforce local laws that we're responsible for. But those communities don't always believe that. You have some communities that are naturally suspicious of any law enforcement, whether it's local, state, or federal. And it poses real challenges in a case like this, where there appears to be so little available forensic evidence, surveillance video. You know, there's not much that's been put out publicly that says they have a lot to go on right now. So what they need is tips from the public, and that public is largely at this point an immigrant community that's probably afraid to come forward.
Right. It doesn't take hundreds of tips. It could take one.
It could take one. They're going to get hundreds and thousands of tips. The vast majority of those are going to be false or just inaccurate. But there is information out there. Somebody has information about this, whether it's a relative of Dulce's or a complete stranger.
Right.
Somebody saw something and has some information about where she is.
Right, a child just doesn't vanish off the face of the earth. When does a case, JJ, become a cold case?
There's no hard and fast rule. Certainly in a child abduction, the case is never going to be closed if it appears that, and there's, again, there may not be any forensic information at this point to say that a murder has been committed. I mean, there's no way to know. I mean, obviously you hold out hope that she was abducted and that she's alive and well somewhere. The more time that goes on, the less likely that starts to appear. But you're always going to hold out hope. But, you know, certainly at some point the trail of information and evidence is going to grow cold. The longer you get time-wise from the crime, obviously people's memories fade. Forensic evidence disappears. That's what's going to make a case cold. You know, there's probably no usable surveillance video unless somebody calls in a tip that they saw someone that matches the description. They can pull surveillance video now that might show an image, could potentially be her. You know, it's going to grow colder by the day at this point, and that's, you know, unfortunate, and that's why it's important to, at this point, to keep information out there about her so that maybe that tip does